Hello and a very warm welcome to the late breaking F1 podcast presented by Sam Sage and me, Ben Hocking. Today, reviewing the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, won by Max Verstappen, surprisingly. Another Red Bull 1-2 with Sergio Perez in second and Charles Leclerc doing what he couldn't do in the first round and rounding out the podium in third. Hello, mate. You right?
Yeah, good, mate. How are you? It was nice to see something different in the Formula One today. If you're new to F1, you'll see that this is a completely strange phenomenon that we've seen. A man called Max Verstappen and a team called Red Bull have delivered a 1-2. Very, very new in this one. Just kidding. It's like the 40th time in a row that he's led the championship. The guy is an absolute phenomenon in terms of ability. He's just too bloody good. But how are you, Ben? Did you have a nice time?
Yeah, I was until it was said that it was his 100th podium, which I've got no problem with the achievement, but it just made me feel like I've done nothing with my life.
The worst part is it's my birthday tomorrow as we record this, and I am older than Max Verstappen, and I will forever be less of an achiever than that man. If he stopped now, like if he just never, all he did was breathe and eat food, he's achieved more than I'll ever achieve now.
And then a guy born in 2005 scored points. Should be illegal.
Yeah, I was 10 when he was born, so that's good.
Right. That's the end of the podcast. I don't think either of us can carry on now. We're fully depressed. We've got too much to cover for that to be the case. Moment of the race coming up later on, including some Discord submissions on that one. Thoughts on Haas cooking up an incredible strategy and getting a point out of it. Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris unable to score a great amount of points today. Our thoughts on whether they got the strategy wrong, or indeed their teams got the strategy wrong. But let's at least start out front with Max Verstappen claiming another very comfortable victory over Sergio Perez. He at least had to make one overtake on the day as Lando Norris stayed out when the early safety car came out. But even so, very relaxed win for Verstappen, taking a I can't remember what it was in the end because of course Perez had a 5-second advantage, but the advantage on track was under 10 seconds. So an improvement from Perez's side versus what we saw in Bahrain. This is obviously a track that served him quite well in the past, Sam. Do you think it's an encouraging thing? He seemed pretty buoyed by the end of the Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think the car is better this year. I hate to say it, but that seems to be reality, that the car is more dominant than a car that won every single race bar one last year, that this car is better. But Sergio Perez, he had his ups and downs. He was a bit Ronan Keating last season. If you don't know what I mean, his life was a bit of a roller coaster. And honestly, it was hard to know whether he was going to have an up or a down each weekend. But both weekends that he's come into this season, he's arguably qualified better. He even critiqued his qualifying in the post-race interview where he said, bit of a shame I couldn't get on the front row, but he was pretty much there or thereabouts. And he had a great start to the Grand Prix, immediately challenging Charles Leclerc, who of course was on the front row next to Max Verstappen. I do feel like, yes, okay, he hasn't got a win, whereas this time last season he did have a victory to his name. But I actually think his performances overall are better. And I think he is more confident. I think he is delivering more comfortably what Red Bull are expecting of him. And if Max Verstappen wins...
Max Verstappen?
Apparently I'm South
That's him
African
next race
now.
in Australia.
Oh,
yeah.
yes, that's it, yeah. If Max Verstappen goes on to win 24 out of 24, terrifying as that sounds, it is plausible. If Sergio Perez keeps doing what he's doing, second place every single time, even if it is by 7 or 8 seconds, I think the gap was, I can't fault him. If they say at the end of the season, do we keep Sergio Perez? I go, well, what more do you want him to do? Holding up the fort, scoring all the extra points, and he's less than 5 seconds away on average. Pretty damn good for a second driver. I think he's coming to this new season collected, put together, and I think he's delivering what he was missing last season, which was the consistency element of it. Only 2 races in, of course. It could change, but I'm feeling positive for him.
Yeah, exactly. I think the last point you made there with it only being a couple of races in mean that we do need to reserve judgment for a little bit longer. For me, at least, it's when we get into the main summer European races, because that's where he struggled the last 2 years. Whereas, this time last year, he actually had more points than what he does now. Although I wouldn't disagree with what you said, that actually his performance here was just as good, if not better, than the win he had 12 months ago. We always like to start these race reviews with what's happened out front. And in order to give kudos to the guy who won the race, and that is so common, Max Verstappen nowadays, it's credit to him that there's not a huge amount to say from his perspective because he has been so good yet again. But I think it is right to give some credit to Perez because whilst I don't think the win was ever under threat, particularly because Perez had that 5-second penalty looming for the second half of the Grand Prix, the fact that margin was far less than what we had in Bahrain is encouraging for him. Now, you could say that Verstappen was, and this is almost definitely true, was managing the lead out front. But in theory, he had no more reason to manage the lead this race than he did last race. And it was far a bigger gap in Bahrain. It was over 20 seconds. So I think given he qualified third, finished second, didn't waste a lot of time in getting into second as well, similar to what he did in Bahrain, where he didn't waste a lot of time. And again, yes, that car is phenomenal, but I think Perez at the moment is doing exactly what he needs to do in that second seat. In terms of the other driver on the podium, Sam, Charles Leclerc, pretty comfortable for him in the end if you compare him to the rest of the field. This will probably be what he thought he could and should have achieved in Bahrain. But your thoughts on his performance?
Yeah, I think when you've got to compare the Ferrari to the Red Bull, the Ferrari is currently, I would say, clearly the second best car on the grid. It is a step behind that Red Bull. As much as I was trying to be super optimistic going into this weekend, and I was trying to kind of give it all the big and that it might be a bit closer, we might see closer racing. That isn't the case. He's done what he could, and the fact he stuck it on the front row. And he gave a good challenge to both Verstappen and Perez was positive, and he picked up the podium. I do think that if, and again, we'll get on to Ollie Bearman, but and no disrespect to him in what I'm saying here, I do think if Carlos Sainz was in the other car in his full competitive state, it might have been a bit of a closer fight for fourth place. We might have had the other Ferrari up there, but I think he literally did every single thing he could have done this weekend. Didn't put a foot wrong. Strategy call was right from Ferrari. They brought him in at the right time under the safety car, of course, where some cars didn't come in. He got past Lando Norris with relatively, it took a few laps, but he got the job done relatively quickly and managed to pull away. Kept well ahead of Oscar Piastri as well after that gap started to form throughout the race. Leclerc is doing everything he can. What I liked from Leclerc in this Grand Prix that maybe last year we would have seen some changes of is the overdriving of the car. I think he accepted that realistically third place was all he was going to get unless a safety car were to come out or an incident were to happen in some way or it magically rains in the desert. Who knows? But Charles Leclerc is a victim of his own ability in the sense that he wants to always push on to achieve more. And if a win is only a few seconds up the road, which, 10 seconds or so is technically possible, I think we've seen Charles Leclerc overdo it beforehand, and he's ending up paying the price for his own ambition. He's put it in the wall on several occasions, and I'm glad that we didn't see that. I know it sounds awful for a viewer that we didn't see the man in third place pushing as hard as he could to try and get further up the grid. But actually for Ferrari, where that team is now and what is actually achievable, he ticked every box. He did it safely. He brought the points home, and he was the team leader in doing so. So I can't fault him. Honestly, can't fault him.
It was a bit of a weird weekend because of what happened with Carlos Sainz and Ollie Bearman replacing him for Charles Leclerc, because I guess in the same way that Bearman could really only win from the weekend, Charles Leclerc was in a bit of not a lose-lose situation, but also, and I'm not even suggesting he was under a lot of pressure, but it was always going to be the case that after this Grand Prix, if Bearman was able to deliver something like what he did, Bearman was going to get all of the plaudits and all of the credit and not Leclerc, despite the fact that Leclerc himself had a very good performance. Like you, I think he did exactly what he needed to do, which is, look, second place, 18 points, first place, 25 points. Neither of those are going to be achievable. Therefore, I think the only shot Leclerc has is to try and get third and leave enough life in your tyres by the end of the race that if you have the opportunity to sneak in the fastest lap, which, he said he was quite fortunate to get DRS, but you still need the tyre life. If you don't have the tyre life at that point, he would not have got that extra point. So you might as well be 10 seconds behind and getting 16 points than being 7 seconds behind and only getting 15 points. So I think Leclerc managed his race pretty much perfectly. And I think your point about him not overdriving is spot on. I think Ferrari are in a pretty good spot right now in that they do seem to comfortably be better than the chasing pack. If we're calling Ferrari the chasing pack, we'll call McLaren, Mercedes, and Aston Martin the chasing pack. We're gonna have to add a lot of chasings if we're getting down to Alpine, but never mind. Yeah, I think he asserted the dominance. I can't remember what the gap was exactly back to Piastri, but I think it was just about double figures. But he wasn't really under threat. So I think Leclerc deserves a lot of credit. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, what I wanted to just mention about Leclerc is you kind of brought up that, I think, the right point that for Bearman, if he delivered a simple, strong performance, which he did, it's hard for Leclerc to come out as a winner in this situation, and it would be for any established driver. But because of that, I actually think Charles Leclerc did what any established driver should do, and he did it fantastically, which is be so gracious, so humble and supportive of Ollie Bearman. Got out the car within his interview when David Coulthard was hosting the interview process, was asked about it, and he spoke about Ollie Bearman in such a positive and supportive manner that that's what I wanted to see from him. He delivered a podium. He was on the front row of the grid. He got the fastest lap point, and then he turns around and immediately compliments a rookie that's been thrown into a difficult situation. It just highlights why God Leclerc is God Leclerc. He's just a fantastic human being that in all aspects of racing and Formula One, he ticks the boxes. And I think he represented himself and Ferrari very well.
Yes, I agree with that. I think he was in maybe something of a luxurious position in that I guess there was no reason for Leclerc not to be that way. I believe he was that way. It's because of who he is. We've seen it throughout years of F1 anyway. But I think because his place is solidified within the team and actually his teammate for next year is already known, there's almost no reason for him to be anything other than supportive. He's not a threat, is he, at this point in Leclerc's career? So I think it made sense from that perspective. But I also do think that Leclerc is just a genuinely nice human being, and that's why he did it. But I think, yeah, Ferrari have come out of this weekend in a really positive way when, given Sainz and his appendicitis, it could have gone quite horribly wrong. Should we move on to driver of the day? Because Ollie Bearman quite comfortably got the public vote on this one. And indeed, he got your vote in terms of the driver of the session yesterday in our qualifying review. So does he get this one as well?
I'm not going to give him driver of the day, but I do think that he deserves so many plaudits, a huge applause. And I do think that this is a prime time example of why we need more cars on the grid in Formula One. Because there are drivers like Ollie Bearman, Liam Lawson, who displayed a great showing last season, of course, and several others like Teo Pourchaire, who is now driving around in Super Formula, who have proven to be good enough to kickstart their Formula One career that simply cannot due to lack of availability of seats. So this was a great advert for why we need more cars on the track. I am actually going to give it to Fernando Alonso because the man, I think, is driving the worst of those top running cars. I think Aston Martin are slower than McLaren overall. I think they're slower than Mercedes overall. And they're by far slower than Ferrari and Red Bull. But the fact that he was able to hold off Russell so comfortably, there wasn't ever really a proper offensive from Russell. He never got to within the point where they were having to actively defend from each other. It was always 9 or 8 tenths at the absolute maximum, then immediately outside of DRS again. I think he outdrove the car. He qualified fantastically well, as we discussed on our qualifying review. The guy was just solid. Even when he gave the little wall a kiss. I give the little wall a kiss. He comes over the radio. And it's just, to anyone else, to me, that is, I've pooed myself there. Fernando Alonso is making a joke over the radio and getting on with it again, and then beats George Russell in a car that I do believe is faster. So for me, Fernando Alonso is driver of the day, but Max Verstappen deserves a shout. I think Sergio Perez had a great race. And I think Piastri also did very, very well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the contenders of this one. I think if I was giving out the award for maybe, and there is a slight nuance, but I would give out like most impressive driver to Ollie Bearman. I think if you were to like blind test it almost, obviously the Ferrari driver finished lower than where the Ferrari was capable of finishing. Therefore, I'm not going to give him driver of the day, but given the circumstance, I think he was the most impressive driver on the day. But if I am giving it out on pure performance, I think Alonso is a very good shout. I think with this race, maybe compared to Bahrain, because I think in Bahrain, with the opportunities for overtakes, it was very difficult for him to do much other than fall back to 9th and then essentially just stay there for the entire Grand Prix. Here, he probably had very similar pace again. We saw like with Hamilton and Piastri, battling away, Hamilton on quite worn tyres, slowing each other up, really. Alonso still wasn't able to get on the back of those two cars, which, you know, isn't actually a knock on Alonso. It's more just shows how impressive he was staying ahead of the other cars that I think, as you say, were quicker. I'm going to give it to Charles Leclerc. I've kind of just outlined the reasons why, but if you consider at the moment, I don't think Verstappen and Perez are touchable. Take those two out of the equation for now. Charles Leclerc has essentially won a very comfortable Grand Prix by over 10 seconds without being threatened. If you say there are 17 drivers Charles Leclerc can beat, he beats 17 drivers. So I'm going to give it to him. From good to bad, worst driver of the day.
Yeah, this is a tricky one because I think initially when I was running through my list throughout the race, it was looking like Kevin Magnussen might be picking up worst driver of the day. You know, squeezing Albon into the wall, gets a move done on Tsunoda off track and doesn't give it back, and he's cost himself 20 seconds. But because of, and we're getting onto this later on, because of the strategy deployed and executed entirely by Kevin Magnussen, I just can't give him worst driver of the day. He turned it around. I'm not saying he deserves best driver of the day either, because there were some big mistakes in there. But he essentially was the reason that Haas picked up a point. But for me, there are two major contenders. Lance Stroll puts it in a wall all of his own doing. Also, he doesn't let go of the wheel as he hits the wall. The man broke his wrists literally a year ago, decides not to let go of the wheel, which is a brave move when you hit the wall at, 150 miles an hour. But I'm going to give it to Daniel Ricciardo. The guy was nowhere for the majority of the Grand Prix, and then right as we get to the very end, we see him spinning away like a Beyblade, all on his own down the straight without anyone around him. And it's just, this is not the Daniel Ricciardo that Red Bull want to see. This is not the Daniel Ricciardo they hired. This is harking back to the Daniel Ricciardo who was struggling in McLaren, who couldn't deliver a result for Toffee. If he wants a Red Bull seat in a year's time, he's got a long ladder to climb up because Sergio Perez is doing a great job, Yuki Tsunoda is trying all he can, and Liam Lawson arguably gave a much more positive impression when he did step into the seat last season. So terrible from Ricciardo, worst driver of the day.
Yeah, the Magnussen one's a really interesting one. I'm very excited for when the two of us and Harry get together tomorrow to record our power rankings episode because that will be available on Patreon for you to listen to. But Kevin Magnussen, how you rank him is going to be so difficult. I also have not given him worst driver of the day, even though there were two big errors in there, and we will discuss those in a little bit. The reason I haven't given it to him is because if you are just looking at X's and O's, if he doesn't make those errors and he doesn't go on that strategy, Haas score no points. Because of what he did, Haas score 1 point. He has helped the team exponentially. Like that is undeniable from that Grand Prix. So I think he just about redeemed himself not to get this award. And for me, it was between two drivers, and they're the exact same drivers that you've already said, Lance Stroll and Daniel Ricciardo. To be honest, with Daniel Ricciardo, he was in contention for it regardless of the spin. The spin didn't help his case, but he was going to be one of the two anyway, because when Kevin Magnussen was going 10 miles an hour and slowing everyone up, Ricciardo wasn't able to get on. Eventually, I think he did, but he was still seconds off that pace. Whereas the likes of Sargent and Albon and Ocon in the Alpine, they're all on the back, and his teammate, of course, Yuki Tsunoda. Daniel Ricciardo wasn't able to get on the back of that, and of course, then the spin really doesn't help his case. It might sound harsh, but it's the kind of error you would probably have expected Ollie Bearman to make in this Grand Prix. It was quite amateurish, is the only word I can think of, to drop it by yourself into turn one. I will actually go the other way with it with Lance Stroll. Only reason being, that car was definitely capable of points, whereas the Minardi perhaps a little bit less so. Lance Stroll should have scored points, and through his own doing, hasn't done. So early in the race as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at the situation around him as well. You've got the fact that McLaren hasn't got great top speed. Your teammate is able to hold off Mercedes, and Ollie Bearman, a rookie, is driving a Ferrari around one of the hardest tracks on the calendar. Lance Stroll should be capitalising. It's a fair shout.
And before we go to our first break, Big Brain Strat, what have you got?
Big Brain Strat. It's hard to go against Kevin Magnussen and Haas, right? And I think I'm going to have to give it that way anyway. We'll get into it. I don't want to talk about it too much because we are going to talk about it after the break. But it was genuinely, he dug himself a massive hole and then simultaneously managed to build himself the ladder to climb out of it. And the fact that it then guaranteed them 1 point and Hulkenberg had to just beat Zhou Guanyu, brilliant. Brilliantly executed. And the fact he was, I think, 2.5 seconds a lap slower than the Sauber. Not the front guys, who he was even slower than, but just the Sauber, and still kept them all behind. Sensational driving from Kevin Magnussen.
Yep. That is the correct answer. For the sake of variety, I'll give it to his teammate, Hulkenberg. It wasn't quite shown on the main broadcast, or at least the right part of it wasn't shown, but he displayed some very good defensive skills using the DRS chicken element of what we've seen in previous years to keep his position going down that main straight for a few more laps than he probably deserved to hang on to if you're looking at his car versus who he was up against. So, yeah, I thought Hulkenberg was quite crafty in the same way that his teammate was in terms of deployment. Just one safety car. I don't know why I said first safety car just before the break, but there was just one safety car in this Grand Prix that came out on, I believe it was lap 8 for Lance Stroll's incident. This prompted nearly everyone to come into the pits, fit the hard tyres, and eventually go to the end of the Grand Prix. There were a few exceptions to that. Zhou Guanyu essentially tried to go as long as he possibly could, but gained nothing from it, I'm afraid. Nico Hulkenberg, as we've already discussed, also was on that strategy that very much helped himself out thanks to what Magnussen did and got them a point. The other two a bit further up the field, Lando Norris, who temporarily led this race, and Lewis Hamilton, both staying on the medium tyres and pitting for soft tyres, not at the pit stop, not at the safety car, but with about 12 laps to go under green flag conditions. Given both of those drivers were unable to get past Ollie Bearman and were in the lower parts of the top 10, in hindsight, was it the right call not to pit them? What do you think?
It's really tricky, I think. I do think it's not an obvious decision. Your choice is two negatives. You either bottle two of your two respective team members up behind their their teammates who are in front of them on the track. Of course, Hamilton would have been bottled up behind Russell, and Piastri would have been bottled up. Norris would have been bottled up behind Piastri. And if even the slightest thing goes wrong with a wheel change or a jack problem, you're dropping both of your teammates further and further down the grid. I mean, it showed. We saw the evidence from Kevin Magnussen's battle that overtaking around Jeddah was not as simple as it seems. You really needed a clear DRS advantage, great traction out of mainly the final corner, and to have no one in front of that battle so you just get a clear run into turn 1. And that's how most overtakes were executed. So the idea of both Hamilton and Norris respectively double stacking behind their teammates when they were so close to all the traffic behind, I do not think is a favourable advantage. I do think that realistically, you calculate how many yellow flags, VSCs, safety cars, red flags we see around Jeddah, more so than many other circuits on the calendar, that I think it's worth a punt. I do think it's worth a bit of a risk to go. These tyres can run for a very, very long time. And that's something I was actually quite grumpy with, was just how long the tyres were able to work on all formats, right? The soft tyre was strong after 15 laps. The medium tyre could run for well over half of the Grand Prix. That hard tyre is still going round on its own, even though the cars have come in. And I do think that that's something that we need to assess moving forward. But my point here is they know that tyre life works. And you saw just how competitive, especially Lewis Hamilton was against Oscar Piastri. He was not able to get past until literally Hamilton came into pit. I think it was on lap 37 of 50, something like that, 14 or 13 laps from the end. So I do think it was the right choice to hang them out. I do think that they would have taken advantage massively had there been a full course safety car or a red flag. Even if it was a safety car and not a red flag, Norris and Hamilton dropping back to 8th and 9th means that they're right behind the rest of the grid who are on used hard tyres and they'd be on fresh soft tyres, and I do think the advantage there would have then shown. I'm not sure they could have planned it any better. They were just unlucky to have had the safety car happen at that moment in the race when they were so close to their teammates and there was so much going on behind them. I think the right call was made. A tricky one, but I do think they made the right call.
My conclusion from this was F1 is a funny old sport sometimes because you had essentially the same situation unfolding up and down the grid with very, very different results. So, as an example of this, Oliver Bearman massively benefited in this race because he did make it through to Q3. If he makes it through to Q3, and at that point, maybe he outqualifies Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda, maybe he gets like 8th place or so, he is probably close enough to Charles Leclerc that he is in that same situation as Lando Norris, the McLaren duo, and the Mercedes duo. But because he qualified worse, they got away with it and they executed a very good double stack. In the same way, the Haas duo, because they were relatively close together, Hulkenberg stayed out. But in that instance, the only way Haas got a point is because they did that. If it was the other way around and they actually both pit for soft tyres at that point, they're probably finishing 12th and 14th or something like that. So it's just a really weird situation where one team has, benefited from this strategy and then two other teams really haven't. I have actually landed on the same conclusion as you. I think it would be very easy for us to sit here and say, in hindsight, well, there was no other safety car. They should have come in. They finished behind Bearman. They should have come into the pits. I don't believe that it was an error from either of those teams to do what they did because, yes, there is always the potential with 42 laps to go in a race around Jeddah, there's going to be at least another VSC or a safety car. There wasn't, but it was probably more likely than not that they would have got one. And even so, I mean, Lewis Hamilton, particularly Lewis Hamilton, with where he was, would have had to fight his way through quite a few cars. Now, I think with Lewis Hamilton, maybe it was slightly more viable because it did seem as if they'd set up their car quite well in a straight line. The McLaren, I think, would have really struggled to make its way back through the field because we saw the Piastri and Hamilton fight was evidence of this. That McLaren, they just did not leave a lot in terms of a straight line. Even with DRS, Piastri was really struggling to get anywhere near Lewis Hamilton. A couple of occasions he did, he couldn't quite see it through. But on most occasions, even with DRS, he wasn't able to attempt the overtake. And then the McLarens just bolted off in that first sector, right? They were just zoomed off like they were no one's business. So overall, I think they made the right call. It's unfortunate from both of their sides. And actually, I also wanted to pick up on the tyre element of it because my disappointment here was not just how long the hard tyres could go, but also just how little difference there was between the three compounds. I don't know, it felt like what we would like to see is there be a considerable difference between all three compounds, but also they're all viable because you can either go very high deg and very high pace or very low deg, but pretty slow. Here, it felt like even when Hamilton and Norris put on the soft tyres, yes, they made inroads, but Charles Leclerc still had the pace to do a fastest lap on 42-lap-old hard tyres at the end of this Grand Prix. I just didn't think there was enough of a difference between the compounds.
If I'm honest, I think that's what ruined the race. I think that's what brought it from being maybe something that could have been quite exciting with that jumbled up order due to the safety car. Because I thought, thinking how tyres normally work in a lot of our Grand Prix, that if Hamilton and Norris, two of the most potent drivers that we've got on the grid, right? They're brilliant at overtaking. They love cutting through. They're really good when they've got a tyre advantage. You think they're going to stick on fresh soft tyres with about 15 laps to go. They're going to be at least a second and a half faster than these hard tyres that have been on now for pretty much 35, 40 laps. Surely they're going to be, like Bearman's toast. There's no chance that he manages to stay in front here. Cut 6 or 7 laps in, they're still 4 or 5 seconds behind Ollie Bearman. And again, no disrespect to Ollie Bearman, but he's the person that you should be able to cut aside without any problems. He's a rookie. If he finished 9th, not 7th, I'd go, brilliant job, Ollie Bearman. No problems at all. And it's this tyre conflict alongside some of the ways that DRS works that is causing a lot of very static Grand Prix that is not making for a lot of fluctuation. We should have strategy fluctuation. And Ben, I know you're the same as I am. I get a lot of enjoyment out of the strategic element of a Formula One race. I love seeing how different teams work to get to the fastest method of getting to the end and overcoming the obstacles that may come up, like a safety car. So when that isn't plausible, when the other option is, well, if you didn't get the chance to stop, you're immediately at a disadvantage and you now can't progress. It's frustrating to see two of the biggest players in a Formula One race aren't able to achieve anything from lap 8 onwards. It's just a bit of a shame that that's the way it's going at the moment.
It's been evidenced in the starting tyres as well with these two Grand Prix we've had so far this year, because Bahrain, all 20 drivers started on the exact same compound. Here we had 18 of the 20 drivers all start on that medium tyre. It was just Bearman and someone else, Bottas was it, who was also
so.
on the soft tyres to start. But point being, we've essentially 40 opportunities for starting tyre, and 38 have been exactly the same across the first two Grand Prix. I would like to see 8 drivers start on the softs, 8 on the mediums, 4 on the hard tyres. But at the moment, there's no reason for the teams to do that because there is such an obvious way to go, which is frustrating. Putting it back to the McLaren and Mercedes, and I guess Aston Martin third, fourth, fifth battle, as it seems to be unfolding at the moment, who do you think comes away from this race the happiest of those 3 teams?
I think McLaren turn around and go, okay, even at a track where our car maybe doesn't benefit 100%, our setup was maybe slightly off for overall offensive pace. I think it showed again that they are the most consistent over these last 2 races of those 3 teams. Aston Martin have really ebbed and flowed. We saw from Alonso that, of course, he was great in practice. He was fast because in one of the practice sessions. He had a good qualifying and he managed to hold off the Mercedes cars, which I was genuinely surprised about, that he was able to stay so far clear of George Russell. But McLarens have always been there or thereabout, both races. They're not as close to Ferrari as they were last season, so they'll want to take a step forward there. But equally, where are Mercedes at the moment? Their step back is worrying. The car seems to be no longer overly aggressive to the point where it's difficult to drive, but equally when it was difficult to drive and aggressive, they were able to pull pace out of it in the right moment. But here, it seems like it's no better than a 5th or 6th on a good day, and more often than not now, it feels like maybe their comfortable position is 7th, 8th, 9th, which for a team that won that many championships so recently is dire. That's really worrying. I think McLaren, they look at their setup and go, okay, we were a little bit vulnerable in a straight line today, but they're running a Mercedes engine. And so they know they've got the same ability and same power as Mercedes. They know they can achieve that. The difference is they were able to set up the car in such a way that both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, when they were in front of someone, were able to defend properly. And Piastri benefited anyway. It's not like he ended up paying the price for not being able to overtake Lewis Hamilton. He just couldn't get it done as soon as he wanted to. So I think McLaren walk away happy. I think Aston Martin will once again all secretly turn and look at Lance Stroll and go, we could have had a double points finish there, and we haven't because you put it in the wall. And at what point does it happen where it's just a bit too much? He's sounding very dejected when he got the silly radio message over the after the crash. Obviously, his engineer came out and said, "Are you able to bring it to the pit lane?" And he came out and said, "No, I'm in the effing wall." It just feels like, one, he's a little bit embarrassed, and 2, I think he feels a little bit fed up of just being constantly not enough, which, is understandable. So yeah, I think McLaren are the ones that walk away happy, and I think the other 2 have got areas that they need to focus on.
Yeah, I think with Aston Martin, I've made my thoughts very clear in terms of the driver lineup, so I won't stress it again too much, but the team has a ceiling whilst Lance Stroll is there. That's the inevitable truth of it. Regardless of what Fernando Alonso is doing in the other seat, if you've got Lance Stroll in your team, there is a ceiling when you get to that level of F1, because all of the other drivers he's competing against are not a step above him, 3 steps above him, in all honesty. With Fernando Alonso's performance, I think Aston Martin will be a little bit worried, because Alonso did a fantastic job holding off George Russell, but there hasn't been one point in this season so far, at least in race trim, where they've been attacking. They are just holding on to whatever they can grab in qualifying sessions. And, that might well work well for them at the likes of Monaco. The way it's going at the moment, you wouldn't put like a podium position away from Fernando Alonso at Monaco. If he was able to grab 3rd, he'd probably hold on to it, right? But nearly every other track, and I think overtaking was, like you say, it was fairly tricky, which I thought actually made this race better than Bahrain. I think there were numerous interesting fights that we could look into. But if DRS is more powerful at other races, if overtaking is easier, it's going to be a struggle for a lot, even someone with the ability of Alonso to hold on to the position like he did today. He did a great job, and he was still nowhere near the podium. From the other two teams' perspective, McLaren and Mercedes, they look very similar. Now, I think you could probably argue McLaren might be a little bit happier that they are as close as they are, because Mercedes, I think, coming into the season might have been a little bit more optimistic. But to me, at the moment, there just doesn't seem to be much in it. I think the Hamilton versus Norris battle was very much evidence of that, in that, they set up their cars completely differently, but it essentially resulted in exactly the same pace. Piastri couldn't get by Hamilton, but again, fairly similar pace. There wasn't much in it. I think George Russell might have had the most boring race of all time. It's definitely up there.
You were like, is he here? Is he actually turned up, or is he just a name on the leaderboard at this point?
He was like permanently 1.4 seconds behind Alonso. It just didn't really change at all. Which, I guess there is a question mark as to what was his true pace, but equally, this is F1. If you can't overtake cars and you can't demonstrate your true race pace, that's your problem. So yeah, I think both of those teams are kind of, they're in a good position to kick on, but then neither of them are quite there yet.
I think my issue with the three of those teams is I'm a little bit nervous that they don't know where to go next, right? They all three of those came into this season with quite swagger about them, confidence. They all left testing with a big smile on their face, or came into testing in McLaren's terms with big smiles on their faces, feeling very buoyed about what's going on. I just don't think all three of them understand these regulations fully and 100% know how to maximise, where Ferrari seems to be doing something different to those three, who of course are all currently Mercedes powered. I know that's going to be changing, but at the moment they're all Mercedes powered. Ferrari are doing something different to everyone else. They're not hitting the heights of Red Bull, but at least they've separated themselves from that chasing pack. And Red Bull came into it going, we've tried something completely different, and have come out with an even more dominant car, which is absolutely terrifying. So I'm a bit nervous that we might end up seeing a drop-off from that incredibly close who's the second fastest that we had almost every single Grand Prix last season. At least that made it exciting, because we had no clue who was going to be on the podium last season.
Shall we... okay. Shall we review some bold predictions? Because it's not great reading again, is it?
I'll go first. I was genuinely really optimistic about what happened for quite a long period of the race, and I thought another safety car or a red flag comes out here, Zhou Guanyu is prime time for a point. Like, he is right there ready to go, and if the right tyre comes on at the right moment, I think he could grab it. Equally, absolutely flabbergasting at the pace of the Haas that they were able to deliver once Kevin Magnussen stopped being a snail. So it turns out, yeah, unlikely. So no, I got 0. Sauber got no points, and it's another great round for me.
It's great stuff, really. 18 finishes, 17th and 18th. Gotta love it.
Yeah, really happy with that one. Thanks, guys.
It's all right. Didn't go much better for me. I said that Yuki Tsunoda was going to be in the top 8, which after qualifying, I was like, 1 or 2 DNFs. He looks okay. I think I might be onto something here. And Yuki Tsunoda went, no, I'm not going to do that. In a way, I think he is not lucky, but we've already given out Daniel Ricciardo. You yourself said Daniel Ricciardo was worst driver of the day. I thought he was the second worst driver of the day. I don't think Tsunoda was that far behind. I don't think he had a very good race
I think
at all.
Yeah, one of those Taylor two halves. I think the first half was good, and then he got caught up behind this K-Mag section, and it all went to rats very, very quickly for Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, it was, he got passed by Ocon, and then Albon comes along, and yeah, I don't think it was great. We'll talk about Minardi in a bit more depth after the next break, but yeah, Tsunoda didn't get top 8, did he? So
it's a big fat no for you.
Harry Eads' prediction is automatically wrong because he's not here. That's a new rule. If you predict something on a preview and you don't turn up to the review, you're just wrong, regardless of what happens. But the good news for him is he was wrong anyway. So he said there was going to be at least 5 safety cars or VSCs. Now, after 8 laps, we had 1 safety car, which, if you use the power of maths, put him in a pretty good position because he was averaging enough to have this sewed up after 40 laps. But that was the only one. So he was 4 safety cars short.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of safety cars short when you do the maths, isn't it? When you only hit 20% of your goal, most people will say that you failed and you haven't succeeded. So no points, nil point for Harry Eid.
Never mind. So if you are keeping count, and I hope everyone has got their late breaking branded abacuses out ready to go, you'll know that we were on 0-0-0 after the first race, and you can move absolutely nothing along to give you new scores of 0-0 and 0.
Brilliant. I'm so proud of us. Once we've come into the new season swinging.
Big up late breaking. If there's one thing that Haas have been renowned for in their time in F1, it's their brilliant strategic thinking. Wait, what am I? Okay. That just sounds really weird to say. But here today, they delivered something. They cooked because Nico Hulkenberg staying out long on those medium tyres, Kevin Magnussen deciding to intentionally pick up 20 seconds worth of penalties to completely throw his race away. And as a result of that, he was able to hold up the entire back end of the grid to the point where Hulkenberg could make his pit stop and come out ahead of Magnussen and therefore, indeed, ahead of everyone else. And he was able to claim a grand total of 1 point, but every point matters in F1. So what were your thoughts on how this race unfolded? Because this was pretty topsy-turvy from their side.
Yeah, I mean, let Komatsu cook when we're serving up some Nico Hulkenbergers tonight for the Haas boys. And I have famously been horribly harsh to Haas. And I think they've thoroughly deserved the slander, if I'm totally honest. But equally, I am not ashamed to hold up my hands and go, well done to Haas. Because they did turn it around, and the car also looked pretty good once they got going. So let's walk it through. Because halfway through that Grand Prix, when we were doing our power rankings, we're getting ready for those, of course, at Patreon, and I was starting to make notes of each driver. I thought, oh no, K-Mag, you're welling for a worst driver of the day shout here, and it's not looking good for you. And let's face it, at the start of this Grand Prix, it wasn't looking good for him. He had squeezed Alex Albon into the wall and damaged his own floor and hurt another car. 10-second penalty, the rarely seen 10-second penalty thrown out for the first time. And then, of course, he overtakes Yuki Tsunoda by simply not using the racetrack, which I think, hey, Haas will take it. Racetracks are overrated. You're correct, Ben. But, of course, the penalty we have seen deployed before, which has been clearly is consistent, I guess, this season, is another 10 seconds. So he picks up 20 seconds of total penalties. Now, over the radio, you start to notice that K-Mag's pace, which is 2.5, 3 seconds slower than the cars in front of him, is not unintentional. He's not actually just slow. And he's doing it on purpose. And the ability to manage your tyres and your battery and to hold about 6 cars behind you. And that's not just behind. He's defending like a lion, as Fernando Alonso might say. He's sticking the car back in around the outside. He made that dive back on Yuki Tsunoda where he kept 2 wheels on the track. And actually, you know what? At that point, I think even if he didn't stay on the track and went over the road again and stayed in front of him and picked up another penalty, I still think he just would have taken it because that was the strategy. And the way that Hulkenberg was able to get just enough of a gap to come in the pits and then come back out in front of that train was a sublime, sensational, genius-level strategy. You really turned an absolute pile of poo and you rolled it up, and you really did roll it into glitter, you put it in the oven, and out came an actually nice-tasting cake. And I don't know how you've done that. That's almost impossible, especially for you, Haas. Your ovens don't even work. But you made it happen, and you've cooked up a tasty point, and you deserve it. You actually deserve the praise. And the car, when Hulkenberg had pitted, and Magnussen was able to just run at his own pace, suddenly, only 4 seconds behind him, and left the others in the dust. There was no competition. It's not like he got passed by everyone after he let it go. They had a good race car. So I was really baffled. Equally, quite happy to be proven wrong about them for this Grand Prix. Brilliant stuff for Haas, and they deserve the praise. Well done.
Yeah, shocking stuff. I think we'll get into the couple of incidents in a moment just to see if we thought they were worthy of 10-second penalties or not. But, let's for now just say as it was, as facts like that, he got 2 10-second penalties. At the time, on the second one, where he overtook Tsunoda off track, I was questioning, because it seemed fairly obvious to me that he should have given that back. It wasn't really a contentious one, at least from my eyes. So I was really confused as to why aren't you just handing this back? Because you're never, if we're looking at Magnussen in isolation, there was never any way that Magnussen, who still had to overtake Zhou Guan Yu, there was no way he was going to overtake Zhou Guan Yu, make up that time. Because we see it quite often at the front, right? Where it's just worth it to take the penalty because you're going to lose more by being stuck behind another car. That wasn't really the case for Magnussen's own individual race. So I was at the point, like, really confused as to why he's staying ahead. But of course, he already had a 10-second penalty for the other incident with Alex Albon. And I'm starting to think that maybe Haas actually said, look, or maybe he didn't say this directly to him, but thought internally at least that he's already done for. He's already got a 10-second penalty. We might as well just take 20 because 20 seconds is 10 seconds doesn't matter. It's as bad as one another, really. He's not getting points. We might as well just keep the track position and now fully commit to this strategy of holding up everyone. In which case, respect, because that was a great idea. And he did a phenomenal job. He really did a phenomenal job. Part of this is the way that Haas set up their cars, for sure. They I think above pretty much any other team, just decided to be very quick on the straights, but you've still got to be very clever with your deployment in order to stay ahead. But of course, it's not just about staying ahead. It's also about going as slowly as you possibly can whilst doing so. And the margin with which he was able to build for Hulkenberg to slot in front of him was remarkably done. And as mentioned, it is a close scrap between themselves and all of the other teams they beat, to the point where 1 point could make all the difference come the end of this year. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. So I thought they were thoroughly impressive. But to your point, Sam, even more encouraging than the strategy itself, which I thought was very clever, the team don't look slow. Like, they look genuinely all right. Now, they're still comfortably behind the top 5 teams, don't get me wrong, but they might be better than the other 4. Like, that's a serious debate that we should be having at this point, because I think it was genuinely unknown. We knew that Magnussen was slowing down to keep everyone behind, but we didn't know what his true pace was. Is it that he's decided to slow down a little bit, or was he slowing down a lot? It was more of the latter. He was slowing down a good amount to keep those cars behind because, as you say, as soon as he was released and able to do his own actual race, he was quicker than everyone around him, or at least everyone behind him, right? And that's the one thing that the Haas has struggled with, is the later you go into a Grand Prix, the worse they get in terms of tyre wear. And we saw at the end of this Grand Prix, Haas were lapping as quickly and quicker than their rivals. Even if we'd seen like a small drop off, right? I'd still say that was pretty encouraging, but it was better than that. And qualifying didn't go well for them. They could have, I think, got a Q3 out of that. If they get a Q3 from Hulkenberg or Magnussen, I don't know. It bodes well. It does bode well for future races, I think.
Calm down, Ben. You know what track's coming up next that they famously always go very well at?
Oh, yes. Australia. I think, probably look, Verstappen's too quick, but 2-3 seems doable.
Famously, they always score brilliantly. Nothing goes wrong at pit stops, and they have always been a real threat when it comes to the Australian Grand Prix. So, yeah, I reckon at least one car on the podium, if not 2. Let's have it happen, Haas, please.
Did you think the 2 penalties for Magnussen were fair?
So, first one is definitely an area of debate because, yes, there was contact between the 2 cars. It was definitely K-Mag's fault, but it clearly showed that Alex Albon was able to drive at relatively race pace afterwards. And I know we shouldn't judge penalties as well based on the aftermath of that, right? It was actually a light tap that happened between the 2 of them. So I actually thought that 10 seconds was probably bordering on harsh, and I probably would have gone 5 seconds. But it was nice to see the return of a 10-second penalty. And if we're going to go down a whole new direction of contact-related penalties for this season, and there was many moments of debate with the commentary team that spoke about how the skewers have come in this season with a fully revised, almost like penalty layout about how that's applied. We're yet to understand that fully. But I thought 5 would have been fair. If they giving him a 5-second penalty, we knew nothing of this 10 seconds, I probably would have gone Yeah, classic 5 seconds, but there it is. The second incident, overtaking off track and gaining an advantage, we've seen 10 seconds given before for that, and I fully agree that 10 seconds is the fair penalty for it, and they were consistent with it. So, in my head, 15 seconds was probably more fair, but I'm not going to argue with the 20.
I feel ill. I'm going to give out a compliment to Haas and the stewards within like 5 minutes of each other. This isn't right. I'm going to be saying that Alpine are going to be 1 and 2 after next race at this point. But yeah, I thought both were spot on. I thought 10 seconds for both was right. I think with the Albon incident, like you say, I mean, it could have gone the other way. It could have, that damage could have stopped Albon from competing for the rest of that Grand Prix, in which case that 10-second becomes, you look at it and say, wow, it's going to have cost Albon much more than 10 seconds. So I think it was absolutely fair. I think Magnussen got lucky that Albon wasn't more damaged by it, but actually what he did, not leaving enough room between himself and the wall, is a worthy 10-second penalty in my view. So I thought they got both right.
I don't believe what I'm hearing. Haas and the stewards, you are in the good books.
Yes, I'm going to have to find someone who's not. Otherwise, this, what am I doing here? But looking at the bottom 4 teams, because we had obviously a Haas score points, we had an Aston Martin score points, and then we had the top 4 teams double scoring, which leave us with 4 teams that didn't score anything. Alpine, Minardi or RB, Sauber, and then Williams. Out of those 4 teams, who should be most worried? Because they were, based on Magnussen's strategy, in a bit of a cluster today.
Yeah, I think this boils down to being between Stake / Sauber / Kick, or whatever we're calling them these days. And I think the other team is actually Williams, which actually upsets me a little bit, because I really did think that they were kicking on. And maybe we're yet to see it. Albon was driving with damage for a lot of the Grand Prix. Logan Sargent is not up to the same standard as maybe those other drivers around him. And Alpine looked... This was encouraging for Ocon. Obviously, Gasly couldn't even really start the race, so I'm just going to go off Ocon's performance. But in terms of moving forward from Bahrain to this Grand Prix alone, they made a good step forward. They were comfortably in that fight. If maybe another safety car or a DNF had happened, I'm not saying points from the cars, but an 11th or 12th place, where previously going into this Grand Prix, I thought no better than a 16th if everyone finishes. So I thought this was positive. Still worried, Alpine. Still got to get it together, but not as worried as I was. But Williams here, I don't know. They seem to be lacking that step forward that I expected. I wasn't expecting leaps and bounds, but I was expecting them to be a little bit closer to, being the team that were always 11th, 12th, 13th. And actually, they seem to very much still be in that back 2 or 3 team fight. And Sauber, I don't know, well, we're the 6th fastest team. Are you?
Show it then.
Show it. Do quickness. Use the car. I don't know. But Valtteri Bottas, much like Daniel Ricciardo, could not catch up to Kevin Magnussen, who was driving around as if he was in my Mini rather than a Formula 1 car. And that's worrying because, if Bottas, who is an experienced driver with race wings and pole positions over Lewis Hamilton, isn't able to deploy the pace needed to get him up there, scary. And Zhou Guanyu, of course, absolutely hampered by a devastatingly slow pit stop. It still never really looked like point scoring, unfortunately, and it's just going to fly out the window very quickly. So they need to do a turnaround, as do Williams, and just show off that step forward. And yeah, I guess Alpine is the other one, but I did see a good step from them today, and that was positive. Doesn't mean it's over, but yeah, those are the 2 that really jumped out at me.
Yeah, I think taking it one team at a time, I think with Alpine... Yes, I think they were certainly better here than they were in Bahrain, at least from Ocon's perspective. I think it's being a bit understated because of how bad that car is and how difficult it is to tell. I do think Ocon's driving very well to start this year. There isn't much to work with at the moment, but I think he is doing a good job. With Pierre Gasly, obviously massively unfortunate that he was essentially out from the start. The only disappointment there is that Anthony Joshua didn't come over the team radio in the same way he did at Austin, because that would have been really funny if Pierre Gasly interrupted in mid-sentence just to go, sorry, AJ, can I speak to someone else? I don't think the car's working.
Can you repair a gearbox on the fly, AJ? Because I'm breaking down.
That would have been so funny. Never mind. But yeah, I think you're right. I think they were a little bit better than they were in Bahrain. I think from Sauber's perspective, yeah, if they're the sixth fastest team, I'd like them to display it at some point. That would be lovely. And then I think Williams, they will be probably most frustrated today because not only were both of their drivers directly stuck behind Kevin Magnussen, I think the most annoying element of it is not the fact that they couldn't get points from it. It's just that they don't really have any idea how quick they actually were. Like, you could convince me that actually Albon and Sargent had quite a bit more pace than they were able to display today. But I couldn't tell you that confidently. Like, maybe they were deserving to be in that mix. Albon did put on a couple of pretty nice moves to end the Grand Prix. Maybe there is something there, but they were just stuck behind for so long in this train that there wasn't much to show. I'm not quite sure what happened with Albon's pit stop because he dropped quite a few positions, which ultimately has cost him probably a lot in this race. But yeah, I think Williams are probably still a bit unknown going into round 3. And then Minardi, they are just a bit disappointing at this point. From Yuki Tsunoda's perspective, I'd love someone to actually calculate a percentage on this, but it feels like he's been stuck behind Kevin Magnussen for about 95% of the season so far. Obviously, the battle between him and Ricciardo, where that was over Kevin Magnussen and his position. Here again, Magnussen is holding him up. And Tsunoda didn't deal with it very well. And Ricciardo, as already discussed, was disappointingly off the pace. This was a team that we thought had a good shot of being clear of this group, and they're very much in it. So I think they might be the most disappointed at this stage. But I think all 4 of them have just been frustrated by Haas to this point, in all honesty.
I can't believe we're saying that. I can't believe that's a line that's out of your mouth, that 4 teams are frustrated by Haas, who were brilliant today.
It's a weird, weird world. Okay, moment of the race. As per usual, we've got some Discord submissions lined up, which, very excitingly, Sam, with his new powered Wi-Fi, is going to do the honor of clicking buttons. This is incredibly exciting. But before we get to that excitement, we'll build up to it because each of us has a moment of the race that we'll give out now. What was yours?
I had 2, and I'm not going to go into details on the other one in case you happen to pick it, but I am going to go with the realization that the Haas team, or Komatsu, are now genii as a combination of the group, and they're able to deploy the best strategy that we've seen since Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris working together in Singapore to deliver a brilliant point for a team that desperately needs it. It was very, very good, and it did not come about by pure accident. They took a bad situation and they turned it into a really good one for the team. I'm genuinely impressed. They are the moment of the race in that, and that's strategic choice.
I'm going to give a lesser spotted worst moment of the day, because I'm going to speak to David Croft quite directly at this point. I know you listen, David. You're a very big fan of the show. James Vowles. Don't ever call him Vowlesy again, please.
Oh.
Is that a thing?
No.
Vowlesy?
Vowlesy. Oh, kids.
If it is a thing, stop it.
We're learning the alphabet today. You've got B and C and D. Those are consonants. But you see A and E and I. Those are vowelsies.
Oh, no. We're getting a bit Vowlesy, aren't we?
Stop that immediately. It's a crime.
Yep. Sorry, David. Just don't bother with that again, please. But my actual moment of the race, and I think I preempted this already by texting Sam and the rest of our group. It was a very early contender, and I couldn't find anything that would beat it later on, which was Lance Stroll not going into the wall. That wasn't the moment of the race, but Lance Stroll going when he went into the wall, saying essentially, "I've hit the wall." And his engineer coming back to say, "Can you bring it back to the pits?" At which point Lance Stroll goes, "Nah, I'm in the wall." There was a lot of sass on that. It's impressive actually, the amount of sass on that line for a guy that has just crashed at that pace seconds before. Impressive.
Yeah, that was the other one that I didn't want to go into details of. I thought that might be the one you picked, but Kid's in a bad headspace, I think. I think he's struggling a little bit. But yeah, still a great line. Delivered excellently.
He did deliver that excellently. But of course, as mentioned, we've got some Discord submissions. So if you'd like to be considered for one of these in the next race, which will be the Australian Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time, get in the Discord. The link is in the description, and we ask for these moments of the race as audio submissions a few minutes after the Grand Prix. So you do have to be fairly quick on it. But we've got some great ones lined up for today, Sam.
Yeah, fingers crossed that the soundboard will work and my hyper-powered internet is able to deliver your gorgeous voices into our eardrums. Here we go. We're going to kickstart off with Save Leclerc. I'm not sure he needs saving after this Grand Prix, but it's still a great name. Here we go. What have you got to say? What's your moment of the race?
Hello, everyone. I am back for the first time this season to save Leclerc from Ferrari prison by giving my moment of the race. For this race, and honestly just this season in a whole, I only have a couple words. Alpine, what are you doing? It's a miracle that they got that high today. You're slow and your car is an eyesore, so be better.
It's great to hear from the Harry Eid fan club when he's not turning up.
I think that was Harry Eid.
It's a great accent that he does. I didn't know he was good at accents.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. An Alpine shout already. And we're moving on to one of our favourite geezers, and that is, of course, Haas.
All right, boys, moment of the race for me was watching Ollie Bearman come across the line in P7. I genuinely got goosebumps, what a fantastic story for him and for the sport. And if sport's meant to do anything for us, boys, it's meant to make us feel something. And in a sport currently where it's been a bit drab, that was a welcome, wonderful thing to watch. Cheers, boys.
Love that from Haas. A bit of an emotional touch.
Can't argue with that.
I also
Can't argue with
imagine
that.
he's rapidly on his way in the car to maybe take the next Ferrari drive if possible, because it looked like he was in a hurry in that submission there, which we love. So big
It'd
up
mess up Leclerc.
Hazard would mess up a lot of people. He sounds terrifying. We've got Wrath coming up next.
Moment of the race, definitely when Alex Albon said, "That's naughty," and then proceeded to not elaborate any further. And Sky didn't give us a replay, so that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're not the Messiah. You're a very, very naughty boy, is what I imagine Alex Albon was definitely thinking as he was going around the
I
track.
forgot about naughty. That was a good one.
Naughty.
Naughty.
That's very British to just say naughty.
Yeah, it is a bit, isn't it?
Americans or people from across the world, please let us know. Is it something you say in both a positive and a negative? Naughty.
Naughty.
Because when you have like a cheeky dinner, right? It's not very good for you or something.
Proper naughty.
You go, "Oh, that's naughty." That is. And it's a normal phrase here in the UK. Anyway,
It's got to be proper before it as well to elevate
yeah,
it.
True. And you don't tend to say all the time the T. Bit naughty, that is. Anyway, coming up, we've got 3 generations of this. I can't believe we're getting them all packed in. 3! It is Real Dad himself. James is back. And we've got the appearance of Grandma, which is incredible.
This is Real Dad and James and Grandma back for 2024 with Moment of the Race.
Hello everybody, we're back. Moment of the race, probably watching Formula 1 with my grandma. And run-up will probably have been Lance Stroll absolutely binning it into the wall. Amazing performance.
What are you doing? Anyway, run out from us and say hello, Grandma.
Hello there.
Bye.
Oh, bless Grandma.
I can't deal.
It's so lovely.
I can't deal. That's so nice.
So wholesome.
Oh. Gonna cry.
If you'd like to also share late-breaking Formula 1 with your families, it's incredibly welcome, and we'd love you all to do that. 2 left. We've got Third Brankus.
Yeah.
Hello, boys. Moment of the race. I'm going to say older Lance Stroll being asked if he could carry on after crashing into the wall and replied with, "Well, no, I'm in the wall." It's good stuff.
A man after Beng's heart there.
Hello, boys.
I played it again. I've let myself down. I've really tarnished my reputation.
Oh no.
Oh, dear.
Very thick.
Very so thick, much bronchus. And we're going to move on to the final, the legend that is Rye Guy.
Hey guys, it's Rye Guy. This is my moment of the race for Jeddah. My moment of the race is the stewards listening to the podcast and listening to Harry and doing something other than a 5-second penalty and giving Magnussen a 10-second penalty for overtaking off track. So that's cool. But yeah, that's my moment of the race. Love what you guys do. Keep on keeping on. And seriously, $12 is the highest tier of Patreon, and it only gets cheaper from there. And it's $12 US. So join the Patreon. I promise you it's worth it. And if it's not, I will pay you myself. Love you guys.
Doing God's work, right guy.
Right guy
Love it.
is a roaming billboard for our Patreon, and honestly, he deserves a knighthood for the level of service he does for us. Thank you, right guy. Thank you to everyone that submitted. If you do want to submit for the Australian Grand Prix, which is coming up next, of course, linky in the description for the Discord. Get in there. It's in the submissions channel. You'll see us ask for it, and you could hear your voice on, obviously, your favourite podcast.
Indeed. And if you're new to the podcast, firstly, very well welcome to you. You might be thinking, oh, well, Australia for a preview is the next time you're going to hear us. Wrong. We are back on Wednesday, every Sunday. So, Sam, if you wouldn't mind getting us out of here until then.
Yeah, so we're going to be back midweek. We've also got Patreon stuff coming out all over the place in the meantime because we are recording a load this week for you Patreon subscribers. So if you think, oh, I want something else Formula 1 related, go check it out. Go on. As Ryguy said, it's not too expensive and it helps us massively. Join the Discord. Follow us on social media, Late Breaking F1 on all channels. And this has been recorded with our lovely faces to appear on YouTube. So hit subscribe, hit like, drop a comment down below. It massively helps us to grow the Late Breaking audience. So we appreciate all the support that all of you already give. We'll see you midweek. In the meantime, I've been Samuel Sage.
And I've been Ben Hocking. And remember, keep breaking late.